Maya checks her retirement app on a random Tuesday between meetings, mostly out of habit, the way you check the weather even when you're not going outside. And there it is, a number she's been circling for 2 years without even fully realizing it. $50,231. She waits for something to happen, a little jolt, a feeling. Maybe her chest is supposed to loosen a bit, or she's supposed to smile the way people do in those cheesy bank commercials. Nothing happens. She closes the app, goes back to her spreadsheet, and forgets about it by lunch. And here's the part that should bother you. That's exactly how it's supposed to feel. Nobody warns you that the biggest financial threshold most people will ever cross doesn't come with fireworks. It comes with a Tuesday, sandwiched between a calendar invite and half-finished coffee, completely indistinguishable from every other Tuesday that came before it. My name's John, and I spend way too much time thinking about the specific moments where money quietly stops behaving the way you expect it to. If you've ever felt like you're saving and nothing seems different yet, stick around, because today we're talking about the number where that finally changes. And before we get into it, quick disclaimer, I'm not a financial advisor. This isn't financial advice, just patterns I've noticed in how money actually behaves once it gets big enough to start behaving badly on your behalf, in the best possible way. Here's the thesis this whole video is built on. $50,000 is not a bigger emergency fund. It's the number where your money quietly stops being a backup plan and starts being an employee. Somewhere around this number, the relationship flips. You stop being the only one showing up to work every day for your future, and your money clocks in alongside you, whether you notice it or not. And I want you to hold on to one thing as we go, because I promise I'll come back to it. The scariest part of hitting $50,000 isn't getting there. It's the 6 months right after, when most people quietly undo it without even realizing that's what they're doing. Let's get into why. Shift number 1 is the math itself, and this is where most people's intuition completely breaks down. Up until now, your savings have basically been a container. You put money in, the number goes up, that's the whole relationship. It's a one-directional street. But somewhere around $50,000, sitting in a typical index fund averaging 8% a year, your money starts generating more in a single year than most people manage to save through actual sacrifice. At $10,000, an 8% year hands you $800. Nice, not life-changing. At $50,000, that same 8% hands you $4,000. That's not pocket change anymore. That's a number that used to take real months of discipline to save, and now it just shows up quietly in the background while you're doing literally anything else. Sleeping, arguing with a coworker over Slack, sitting in traffic. It doesn't care what you're doing. It just keeps working. Think of it like a snowball at the top of a hill. For the first stretch, you're the one doing all the work, pushing it, packing more snow on by hand, watching it barely grow no matter how hard you push. But once it has enough mass, gravity starts doing more of the work than you are. $50,000 is roughly where the hill gets steep enough that you can feel the snowball pulling slightly ahead of you for the first time in your life. And once you feel that pull, once you start trusting the process in a completely different way, because it stops being a theory somebody told you and starts being something you've actually watched happen in your own account. Shift number 2 is what happens to your relationship with risk, and this one surprises people the most. When you have a few $1,000s saved, the idea of putting money into the market feels dangerous, because losing 10% of a small number still feels like losing something you can't easily replace. Every dip feels personal. But once you cross $50,000, something strange happens. You start being able to stomach a bad month or even a bad year because you understand the math now. You've watched the account dip and recover before, maybe more than once, and you've lived to tell about it. That emotional callus is worth more than people realize, because the single biggest destroyer of long-term returns isn't market crashes, it's panic selling during them. Research on investor behavior consistently shows that the average investor underperforms the very funds they're invested in, purely because of badly timed emotional decisions, selling low out of fear and buying back in high out of relief once things feel safe again. $50,000 is usually the point where you've been through enough small storms to stop making those decisions, because you finally got the scar tissue to prove the storm always passes.
Shift number 3 is career leverage, and this is where the walking away money conversation gets a serious upgrade. $10,000 gives you breathing room. $50,000 gives you options. That's the number where you can genuinely consider leaving a job without another one lined up, relocating to a cheaper city to reset your life, taking 3 months to figure out what you actually want to do instead of panic applying to the first listing that'll have you. Picture the difference between two people sitting across from the same terrible boss. One of them has $1,100 in checking. The other has $50,000 invested. They're hearing the exact same unreasonable demand, but they are not having the same internal experience. One of them is calculating how many more insults they can absorb before rent is due. The other is calculating whether this job is even worth their time anymore. And here's the part that matters even if you never actually quit. Just like the $10,000 mark changes how you show up in a negotiation, $50,000 changes how you show up in your entire career. You ask for the raise you actually deserve instead of the one you're afraid to ask for. You push back on scope creep instead of quietly absorbing it. You stop being the employee who's easy to underpay, because underpaying someone only works if they're too scared to leave, and you've just stopped being scared. Money you never touch is still working for you, just not in the way you'd expect, and often not in a way you can even put a dollar figure on.
Shift number 4 is the part almost nobody talks about, which is what $50,000 does to how you see other people's money. Up until this point, other people's spending feels like a threat. The coworker with the new car, the friend posting from vacation, all of it lands as a quiet little jab, a reminder of what you can't afford, a tiny recalculation of where you stand in some invisible ranking nobody asked you to participate in. Somewhere around $50,000, that jab starts losing its sting. Not because you've suddenly got more than them. You probably don't, and you have no real idea what their actual finances look like underneath the vacation photos. But because you've proven to yourself that you're building something real, and that proof is worth more than the temporary hit of a flashy purchase. You stop needing to explain your car. You stop needing to justify why you're not going on the trip. The story you're telling yourself about your own financial life finally outweighs the story other people's spending used to tell you. And that shift alone is worth more than most people's entire annual raise.
Shift number 5 is where the acceleration gets almost unfair. And I want to walk through the actual numbers because they'll probably surprise you. Let's say you're saving $800 a month and earning that same 8% average return. Getting to your first $50,000 from zero takes a little over 4 years. 4 years of consistent, sometimes boring, sometimes annoying discipline. Saying no to things you wanted so you could put money somewhere you couldn't see it. But your next $50,000, the one that gets you to $100,000, doesn't take another 4 years. It takes closer to 2.5. Same monthly contribution, same effort, same risk tolerance, same sacrifices at the grocery store. The only difference is that the first $50,000 is now working alongside you the entire time, quietly generating growth in the background while you keep showing up and doing the exact same thing you were already doing. By the time you're stacking your third $50,000 on the way to $150,000, the timeline shrinks again, down to somewhere around 1.5 years, because now you've got $100,000 compounding in the background while you keep doing exactly what you were already doing. Run it further, and it gets almost comical. By the time your portfolio crosses $300,000, a market with an average year alone generates roughly the same $24,000 that took you years of $800 monthly contributions to build from nothing. This is the part that should genuinely excite you, because it means the hardest, slowest, most painful stretch of building wealth is the very first one. Every stretch after that gets faster, not because you're working harder, but because your money is finally pulling its own weight instead of leaving you to carry the entire thing alone.
Shift number 6 is the one I promised to come back to, and it's the reason this video exists. The scariest moment in this entire process isn't the climb to $50,000. It's the 6 months right after. Because here's what happens to a lot of people the moment they hit a milestone like this. They start treating the number itself as the finish line instead of the starting line. They figure they've proven they can save, so they deserve a reward. A nicer car, a bigger apartment, a trip that quietly drains a chunk of what took years to build. And on paper, none of that looks reckless. It's one purchase, one decision, easy to justify in isolation. But that one purchase resets the compounding clock in a way most people never sit down and actually calculate. Pulling $15,000 out of a $50,000 portfolio to fund a reward doesn't just cost you $15,000. It costs you every single year of growth that $15,000 would have generated for the next 20 or 30 years. At 8% average returns, that $15,000 left alone becomes over $100,000 by the time you'd otherwise retire. So that reward isn't free, and it isn't even really $15,000. It's borrowed directly from your future self at an interest rate your future self never agreed to. And your future self doesn't get a vote in the transaction, because by the time the bill comes due, the decision is decades old and impossible to undo. I've watched this exact pattern play out with people who did everything.
Shift number 7 is about the opportunities that simply didn't exist for you before. Not the flashy stuff, the quiet stuff. A down payment on a place that actually builds equity, instead of rent that disappears every month into someone else's mortgage. The ability to say yes when a friend brings you a legitimate business opportunity, instead of watching from the sidelines because you can't risk the cash and have to pretend you're just not interested. The option to take an unpaid month to care for a sick parent, or finally start the business you've been thinking about for 3 years, without it turning into a financial emergency that follows you for the next decade. $50,000 doesn't hand you these opportunities on a silver platter. It just removes the excuse that was stopping you from taking them when they show up. And they do show up, more often than people expect, usually right around the time they finally have the cash to act on them, which is either a strange coincidence or proof that opportunity has always been circling, waiting for you to be ready to catch it instead of watching it pass by for the 3rd time. While we're on the topic of building real financial systems instead of guessing your way through it, I put together a community where I go through exactly how I approach saving, investing, and building income outside of a single paycheck, step by step, without the guesswork and without the get-rich-quick nonsense that clutters up this space. If that's something you're interested in, the link's in the description. No pressure, just there if you want it.
Shift number 8 is the quietest, and honestly, the most important one on this entire list. Somewhere around $50,000, you stop being someone who's trying to save money and become someone who simply is a saver. That identity shift matters more than the number itself, because identities are sticky in a way that willpower never is. You don't have to talk yourself into contributing to your investment account anymore. You don't white-knuckle your way past an impulse purchase, replaying the math in your head to talk yourself down. It just becomes who you are. The same way a runner doesn't have to convince themselves to lace up their shoes after a few years of doing it. They just do it, because not doing it would feel stranger than doing it. The behavior stops requiring motivation and starts requiring almost nothing at all, which is exactly why the second $50,000 comes so much easier than the first. You're not fighting yourself anymore. You're just watching a version of yourself you already built keep doing its job on autopilot.
Shift number 9, and this one ties everything else together, is what $50,000 does to your tolerance for financial noise. When you had nothing saved, every headline about a market downturn felt like it was speaking directly to you, a warning siren demanding immediate action. Every hot stock tip from a coworker felt like a chance you couldn't afford to miss. But once you've got real money invested and you've watched it grow through a few ordinary ups and downs, the noise starts sounding like exactly what it is: noise. You stop checking your portfolio every day. You stop needing to have an opinion on every headline. This isn't apathy, it's confidence. The kind that only comes from having actually lived through a cycle and come out the other side fine. And that quiet, boring confidence is worth more to your long-term returns than any single investment decision you'll ever make. Because the investors who do the best over decades are rarely the ones making the cleverest moves. They're the ones making the fewest unnecessary ones. Shift number 10 is the one that shows up last, but changes the most. And it's about what $50,000 does to the people around you, not just to you. Money habits are contagious in ways most people never notice. The sibling who watches you casually turn down a purchase that would have wrecked your budget 2 years ago starts asking how you did it. The partner who used to dread the monthly budget conversation starts trusting the process because they've watched the number climb steadily instead of in panicked, unsustainable bursts. If you have kids, or ever plan to, they absorb far more from what you do quietly with money than from anything you ever explicitly teach them. A kid who grows up watching a parent calmly, boringly, consistently set money aside every month learns a lesson that no allowance chart or lecture could ever replicate. $50,000 isn't just a number sitting in your own account. It's proof, visible to the people who know you best, that the boring version of building wealth actually works. And that proof tends to spread, whether you're trying to teach anyone or not.
So let's go back to Maya for a second. Closing her banking app, forgetting about the number by lunch. That non-reaction wasn't a failure to feel something. It was the proof that the system finally worked. She didn't need the fireworks because the fireworks were never the point. The point was building something that runs whether she's paying attention to it or not. Something that doesn't need her permission anymore to keep growing. Something that will still be compounding quietly in the background on the days she forgets it exists entirely. That's what $50,000 actually is. Not a finish line, not a reward you cash in the moment you cross it, but the exact moment your money stops waiting on you and starts pulling its own weight alongside you. What you do in the 6 months after you get there will matter more than the years it took you to arrive, because it's the only part of this entire process where discipline can be undone in a single afternoon. Protect it. Let it keep running. Resist the urge to reward yourself with something that shows. And check back in a few years, because the person who does that won't recognize their own bank account in the best possible way. Just a reminder, I'm not a financial advisor, and this video is for educational purposes only. Any results depend on your own decisions. I'll see you in the next one.